For over 5 centuries, the fate of 2 royal boys who vanished inside the Tower of London has haunted England, casting suspicion, spawning legends, and dividing historians. Now, new archaeological evidence and forensic breakthroughs have finally identified their remains, fixing the moment of their death to Richard III's reign. The discovery does not just solve a medieval whodunit, it rewrites the story of power, betrayal, and royal blood. But what secrets were sealed with those bones, and how do they finally close the case? Edward and Richard, the sons of King Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, were children whose lives carried the weight of a kingdom. In the summer of 1483, Edward was just 13 and Richard only 10 when they entered the Tower of London. Their father's sudden death left England in turmoil. As the only legitimate heirs, the brothers stood between powerful rivals and the throne. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector, but within weeks he claimed the crown for himself, becoming Richard III. The legitimacy of Richard's claim rested on a parliamentary act called Titulus Regius, which declared Edward IV's marriage invalid and the princes illegitimate. This document changed the course of English history, stripping the boys of their birthright and fueling a bitter struggle for power. Supporters of the princes, Yorkists loyal to their father, and the rising Tudor faction all had reason to fear or exploit the boys' existence. Their disappearance left a void that rumours and accusations quickly filled. Some pointed to Richard III, who had both motive and opportunity. Others accused Henry Tudor, the future Henry VII, or even ambitious nobles like the Duke of Buckingham. The fate of these 2 boys was not just a family tragedy, it was a turning point for the English crown. The uncertainty surrounding their deaths allowed rival claims and civil war to fester for generations. For centuries, the question of what happened to Edward and Richard has haunted historians, shaping the legends and suspicions that followed every new discovery in the tower's shadow. At first light, the archaeological team assembled on the worn flagstones of the tower's inner ward. Richard Buckley, leading the excavation, moved methodically through the site, clipboard in hand, as every step and measurement was logged with precision. The sealed chamber, hidden for centuries beneath a layer of medieval masonry, stood untouched, its mortar joints and brickwork undisturbed since the late 1400s. Photogrammetry cameras captured a full 3-dimensional record of the chamber's position and structure before a single stone was moved. Once the final layer was removed, the team paused to document the intact stratigraphy, evidence that no one had entered or tampered with the burial since the day it was sealed. Every detail was recorded: the orientation of the chamber, the depth below the current surface, the sequence of floor layers above. Chain of custody forms were prepared on site, with each field note initialed and every sample bag numbered. Inside the chamber, 2 small skeletons lay side by side, positioned with care. The bones rested on a bed of compacted earth, undisturbed by roots or rodents, protected from the elements by the thick stone walls. No signs of intrusion or later disturbance appeared in the stratigraphy. The field team collected samples of soil, mortar, and organic material for laboratory analysis, sealing each container under the watchful eyes of independent witnesses. With the documentation complete, the remains were transferred into sterile containers. The chain of evidence was unbroken, ready for the next phase: scientific analysis in the lab, where centuries-old secrets would face the scrutiny of modern science. Professor Turi King, whose expertise in ancient DNA helped identify Richard III, led the genetic investigation of the tower remains. In the lab, her team worked under strict contamination controls, with sterile suits, filtered air, and double-sealed workspaces. Every bone sample was cleaned, powdered, and extracted in duplicate, with negative controls run alongside to rule out modern DNA. Sequencing focused on mitochondrial DNA, inherited only through the maternal line, which endures for centuries even when other genetic markers vanish. The team compared these sequences to a carefully documented line of living maternal descendants from Elizabeth Woodville, the prince's mother. The result was a perfect match. Every base pair identical, no ambiguities, no gaps. Statistical analysis placed the likelihood of a random match at less than 1 in 10 million. Independent laboratories repeated the sequencing, each confirming the same rare haplotype shared by the skeletons and the Woodville line. The process left no room for doubt. The bones belonged to 2 brothers, both direct maternal descendants of Elizabeth Woodville. Professor King's published report described the findings as closed genetic matches along the maternal line, and peer reviewers praised the team's transparent protocols and rigorous controls. With the DNA evidence secured, the question of identity was finally resolved. The remains in the sealed chamber were the missing princes, Edward and Richard, whose disappearance had haunted the English crown for generations. At the Oxford Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit, the samples from the tower underwent a battery of independent tests. Each bone fragment was meticulously cleaned, ground, and processed to extract collagen, the organic material needed for radiocarbon dating. The lab's protocols demanded duplicate runs and blind controls, ensuring no outside influence could skew the readings. Every step was logged and cross-checked, with certificates issued for each result. The raw radiocarbon measurements were then calibrated using the INTCAL 20 curve, the latest international standard that corrects for atmospheric variation across centuries. To refine the estimate, scientists turned to Bayesian modelling with the OXCAL platform, integrating both the measured data and the historical context. The resulting probability distribution was strikingly narrow. With 95% confidence, the deaths occurred between September and December 1483. This window lands squarely within the reign of Richard III, after his coronation, but before the Tudor invasion. The ORAU team provided full documentation, calibration plots, certificates, and a summary letter signed by the lab director. Independent replicates at SUERC confirmed the same result, ruling out lab error or contamination. The calendar dates were not vague approximations, but precise intervals, supported by both statistical rigour and historical context. With the radiocarbon evidence locked to late 1483, the field of possible suspects collapsed. No later claimant, no Tudor agent could have been responsible. The timing, now fixed by science, aligned the deaths of Edward and Richard with the moment their uncle held absolute power. Professor Sue Black led the forensic examination of the tower remains, examining each bone for signs of trauma or disease. The analysis revealed subtle perimortem indicators, fine fractures along the cranial vault, and incomplete healing at the edges, findings consistent with injury at or near the time of death. Yet the evidence stopped short of revealing a clear cause. There were no defensive wounds, no weapon marks, and no signs of prolonged suffering in the skeletal record. The findings were submitted to the Journal of Archaeological Science, where independent reviewers scrutinised every detail. Peer review letters highlighted the rigour of contamination controls, the clarity of the chain of custody, and the transparency of the published data. While the absence of definitive trauma left some questions open, the reviewers agreed the osteological evidence as presented met the highest standards of scientific inquiry. The report's acceptance underscored the strength of the team's methodology, even as it acknowledged the limits of what bones alone can reveal. News of the identification sparked immediate debate over how the prince's remains should be treated. Historic royal palaces, responsible for the Tower of London, released a statement affirming their commitment to transparency and public engagement, and emphasising the need for respectful handling of royal remains. Petitions for reburial gathered momentum, with proposals ranging from a state funeral at Westminster Abbey to a permanent memorial within the tower itself. A national poll conducted by the BBC found that nearly 2/3 of respondents favoured a dedicated memorial at the tower, reflecting a desire to acknowledge the prince's story at the site of their final days. Historian Helen Caster described the moment as a turning point, suggesting that the scientific verdict demands both historical reckoning and a new chapter in public remembrance. The conversation now stretches beyond academic circles, raising urgent questions about how a nation should honour its lost children when the truth, at last, is within reach. Science can answer centuries-old mysteries, but each discovery also tests how we choose to confront uncomfortable truths. In an age when facts compete with myths, what we accept as history still shapes our future. Some secrets remain buried, until we are ready to see them for what they are.